I was washing the breakfast dishes when my phone buzzed on the counter, and I almost didn't answer it. It was a Tuesday morning in October, the kind where the light comes in sideways through the kitchen window and hits everything gold. I had my coffee going, my gospel station low on the radio, and a whole quiet morning stretching out in front of me. Retired life. 63 years old and finally learning what stillness felt like. But I answered, "Mom." My son's voice, tight, like he was holding something behind his teeth. "Baby, what's wrong?" A pause. Then nothing's wrong. I need to tell you something about the wedding. You want to know what I said next? Nothing. Because something in his voice told me I needed to hear this sitting down, and I wasn't near a chair yet. So I walked to the kitchen table, pulled out the wooden chair that wobbles on the left side, the one I keep meaning to fix, and I sat down in the October light and waited. That was the morning my son told me his fiancée's mother would be handling all the wedding arrangements, that she had more experience with these kinds of events, that it would be less stressful for everyone if I just let them take the lead. I want to say I knew then. I want to say I saw every single thing that was coming. But the truth is, I sat at that wobbly kitchen table, looked out at my backyard where I taught that boy to ride a bike, and I said, "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever makes it easier." I hung up and stared at my coffee until it went cold. Let me back up. My name is Beverly, and I raised my son Nathaniel alone from the time he was 11 years old. His father, God rest him, passed from a heart attack in the spring of 2001, 2 weeks after Easter. I was 40 years old with a sixth grader, a mortgage in Decatur, Georgia, and exactly $4,200 in savings. I was a licensed practical nurse at the time. I went back to school nights, got my RN, then kept going until I had my BSN. By the time Nathaniel graduated high school, I was a charge nurse at a regional hospital, and by the time he finished college, I had moved up to nurse manager for the surgical floor. I also bought my first rental property at 51, a duplex on the east side of Atlanta. Then another. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you this so you understand exactly what kind of woman I am, and so you understand that what happened next was not something that happened to a woman who didn't know any better. It happened to me anyway. Nathaniel met his fiancée, I will call her by her name, which is Tara, about 2 years before the wedding. She is from a family in Buckhead. Old Atlanta money, or at least old Atlanta presentation. Her mother, Vivon, is the kind of woman who knows the maitre d' at every restaurant she walks into and wants you to notice that she knows him. I met Vivon at a dinner maybe 4 months after Nathaniel and Tara started dating. She shook my hand with 2 fingers and asked me what part of Decatur I was from, the way you'd ask someone what they'd had for breakfast. Just filling silence. I smiled and told her. She smiled back and said, "How charming." Nathaniel didn't notice. He was looking at Tara. He looked at that girl like she hung the sun up every morning. And I will admit to you, because this is a true story and I'm not going to paint myself as having no feelings, I was glad for him. He deserved someone to love. He'd watched his father die at 11 years old. He'd grown up with a mother who worked double shifts and still made it to every single one of his basketball games, but who was also sometimes too tired to be present even when she was present. He deserved a soft place to fall. I just didn't expect the fall to include me. The engagement happened in March. A rooftop restaurant downtown, ring in a champagne flute, the whole thing. Tara's mother had apparently helped plan it. I found this out not from Nathaniel, but from the engagement announcement that Vivan sent to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I know because a woman from my church texted me a picture of it, my son's engagement announcement, sent in by his future mother-in-law. My name was listed in it correctly, but I had not been consulted about any of it. I mentioned it to Nathaniel. Gently, he said Vivan had just been excited and wanted to do something special. I said, "Of course, that's lovely." I went home and added it to the list I had started keeping in a notebook I bought at the drugstore. Small spiral notebook, blue cover. I wrote the date at the top of each entry. I am a nurse. I document things. It is what I do. The calls to the venue went to Vivan. The florist meetings, Vivan. The caterer, Vivan and Tara. Nathaniel told me the venue was in Vinings, a beautiful old estate property, and that it would hold about 200 guests. I asked how many people were invited from my side of the family. He said he'd have to check with Tara. He never got back to me about it. In June, about 8 months before the wedding date, I was invited to what was called a planning lunch. I put on a nice dress, the gray wrap one I wear to church on fifth Sundays, and drove out to a restaurant in Buckhead. Vivan was already there when I arrived. She was seated with Tara and 2 women I didn't know, who turned out to be Tara's aunts. There were menus already. Water already poured. I had the distinct sensation of arriving late to something that had started without me. Vivan stood and embraced me in the way you embrace someone you are performing warmth for. She said, "Beverly, we are so glad you could join us." Like I had been fit in. Like I was the one doing the joining. We looked at centerpiece photographs and fabric swatches and talked about table linens. I asked about the seating chart. Vivan said it was still in progress. I asked whether my cousins from Birmingham would be seated near the family section. She said, "Of course, we'll make sure everyone is comfortable." I wrote that down in my notebook when I got home. Everyone is comfortable. June 14, blue notebook. What I did not write down. What I didn't need to write down because it was pressed into me like a thumbprint was the way Tara had not looked at me once during that lunch. Not once. She'd talked across me, around me, through me, and when I'd asked a direct question about the ceremony program, she'd looked at her mother first before answering. I drove home on the highway with the radio off and I thought, something is wrong here. Not the small wrong of people being rude. The larger wrong of something being deliberately built. I didn't say anything to Nathaniel yet. In August, I got the official invitation in the mail, like a guest. My son called to tell me it had been sent out before I could ask him about it. He said, "Mom, I know it's a little formal, but Vivan does everything properly. You know how she is." I said, "I do." He said, "You'll be in the family section right up front." I said, "Okay, baby." I hung up and opened the envelope. The invitation was beautiful, cream cardstock, gold letterpress, a little botanical border. On the inner envelope, the one addressed to me specifically, I saw my name handwritten, Beverly Oakes. No Mrs. No Nathaniel's mother. Just my name, the same weight as any other name on any other envelope going to any other guest. I put the invitation on my refrigerator under a magnet. Then I called my sister in Memphis. My sister Clarice is 68 and has been married to the same man for 41 years and has opinions about everything. I love her for it. I told her what had been happening piece by piece, and she listened the way she always listens, which is completely and without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Bev, that woman is building something, and your son is either helping her or he doesn't see it." I said, "I know." She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to keep watching." And I did. In September, Nathaniel came to dinner at my house on a Sunday. I made his favorites: baked chicken, mac and cheese from scratch, collard greens with smoked turkey. He ate 2 plates and looked happy, and I watched him and thought about the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch with his head in my lap while I studied nursing textbooks. I thought about the winter I worked 3 doubles in a row to make sure he could go on the 8th grade class trip to Washington, D.C. I thought about how I'd sat in the parking lot of his college orientation and cried for 20 minutes because I was so proud and so lonely at the same time. After dinner, I asked him about the seating chart. Casually, like it was nothing, he said it was finalized. I was in the 2nd row. I said, "Second row?" He said yes. The 1st row would be Tara's immediate family: her parents, her 2 brothers and their wives, and her grandmother who was flying in from Savannah. I said, "And where does your mother sit, Nathaniel?" He looked uncomfortable. He said, "Mom, it's just there are a lot of people to fit in, and Vivan organized it by what?" He didn't finish the sentence. I cleared the dishes. I asked him if he wanted coffee. I sent him home with a container of mac and cheese because that boy never remembers to eat properly during the week. Then I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet and I opened my blue notebook and I wrote, September 22, 2nd row. And then I wrote something else. I wrote, I have been paying for this wedding. Because I had been. Nobody said it out loud at the planning lunch, and it wasn't in any contract, but Nathaniel had asked me 8 months ago to contribute to the venue deposit because he was saving for a house down payment. I'd written the check for $12,000. I'd also quietly agreed to cover the rehearsal dinner, which was going to be held at an upscale restaurant in Midtown. That estimate was another $6,000. Between the two, I had put in $18,000 of my own money into an event where I was going to be seated in the 2nd row behind a grandmother who was flying in from Savannah. I did not sleep well that night. The clarity came at 3 in the morning, the way it usually does for me, while I was lying on my back in the dark, listening to the neighborhood be quiet. I am 63 years old. I have been making hard decisions alone since I was 40. I know what it feels like when something needs to be done and there is no one else to do it. I got up. I went to my home office, the 2nd bedroom I converted when Nathaniel moved out, and I sat at my desk and I opened my laptop. I did not call Vivani. I did not call Tara. I did not send a dramatic text to my son at 3 in the morning. I just started pulling together what I needed. My check for the venue deposit had cleared in February. I found the email confirmation in my inbox, the one I had forwarded to Nathaniel at the time. I printed it. I found the text messages where Nathaniel had asked me for the money, where I had confirmed I was sending it, where he had sent back a heart emoji and said, "Thank you, Mom, you're the best." I took screenshots. I had the rehearsal dinner estimate saved as a PDF in my downloads folder because I am the kind of woman who saves PDFs. I put everything in a folder, physical copies in a manila envelope, digital copies on a thumb drive. Then I went back to bed and slept until 7. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, a woman named Carol who has handled my investment accounts for 11 years. I told her I needed to understand my options around a significant cash gift I had made to a family member. She was professional and clear. She told me that without a written gift agreement, informal cash contributions are typically considered gifts and retrieval is difficult. But she also told me that forthcoming contributions were entirely within my control. The rehearsal dinner had not been paid yet. That $6,000 was still in my checking account. I also called my attorney. I have had the same attorney for 15 years. I used him when I bought my rental properties. His name is Gerald Whitmore, and he is a quiet man who wears bow ties and is extraordinarily precise. I told him what I was dealing with. He listened. He said, "Beverly, You're not legally obligated to pay for a rehearsal dinner or anything else. If you've made no signed commitment, you can simply withdraw. I said. And the 12,000? He said. That's more complicated. But let's talk about what you actually want to accomplish here. What I wanted to accomplish. I sat with that question. I did not want to blow up my son's wedding. I want to be clear about that. I am not a woman who blows things up for the satisfaction of it. I wanted my son to see me. I wanted him to understand that what was happening, this slow, quiet erasure, this redrawing of lines that moved me from mother to guest to afterthought, was not something I was going to accommodate with silence and mac and cheese and a smile. So I decided on 3 things. The first thing I did, I called Nathaniel and asked him to come to my house that Saturday. I said I needed to talk to him about the wedding logistics. Nothing alarming, just logistics. He came. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. I put 2 cups of coffee between us, and I slid a piece of paper across to him. It was a simple accounting. February deposit, $12,000. Beverly Oaks. Rehearsal dinner estimate, $6,000. Beverly Oaks. Pending. Total committed or contributed, $18,000. Total acknowledgement of my role in the wedding planning, 0. He stared at it. I said, I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. But I need you to look at what this says. He said, Mom. I said, don't. Not yet. Look at it. He looked at it for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car went by. He said, I didn't know you felt this way. I said, you didn't ask. And then, because I needed him to understand the full shape of what I was describing, I told him about the planning lunch where I'd been treated like an appointment, about the invitation with just my name on it, about the second row, about the 8 months of being managed and arranged and fit in around a family that had never once reached out to me directly, never included me in a decision, never acknowledged that I existed in the story as anything more than a line item in the funding column. I did not raise my voice. I am 63 years old and I raised a child alone and worked night shifts in an ICU, and I know how to say a hard thing in a quiet voice. When I finished, Nathaniel looked like someone had set something down on him. Heavy. He put his elbows on the table and covered his face with his hands. He said, I should have seen this. I said, yes. He said, I don't know how I didn't. I said, you were in love. That's not a crime. But you're sitting at my table right now, and now you know. What are you going to do with that? The second thing I did was contact the restaurant for the rehearsal dinner and inform them that I would not be moving forward with the booking under my name. Politely. Professionally. I was sorry for any inconvenience. I was withdrawing my commitment. They were very gracious about it. I did not tell the van. I did not tell Tara. I let that information travel however it was going to travel. It traveled. Tara called me 4 days later. The first time she had ever called me directly in 2 years of dating my son. Her voice was different than I expected. Not cold, but careful. The way someone talks when they've rehearsed it. She said, Beverly, I heard about the rehearsal dinner and I just want to make sure everything is okay. I said, everything is fine, Tara. I simply realized I shouldn't have committed to something before all the details of the event were fully settled. A silence. She said, what details? I said, well, for example, the seating arrangements. I think there may have been some confusion about where I'd be sitting at the ceremony. She said, you'll be in the family section. I said, second row. Another silence. Longer. I said, Tara, I want this wedding to be beautiful. I want you and my son to start your life together with joy and without weight. I truly do. But I am his mother. I raised him alone for the better part of 20 years. I am not a guest at this event. I am family, and if that's not how I'm going to be treated, then I need to reconsider what role I play in funding it. I was not cruel. I was not loud. I simply said the thing that was true in the most direct language I could find. She said she would talk to her mother. I said that sounds like a good idea. The third thing I did came about a week later, and it surprised even me. Nathaniel asked if he could come by again. He came on a Wednesday evening this time. He sat down and looked different. Not lighter exactly, but more like himself. Less like someone performing a version of himself for an audience. He said, "Mom, I had a long conversation with Tara." I said, "Okay." He said, "And I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I said, "I am always honest with you." He said, "Did you talk to Mr. Wedmore about any of this?" I said, "I talked to Gerald about all my financial matters. Yes." He exhaled slowly. He said, "He mentioned, Tara's mother apparently. There was a conversation that came up about a prenuptial agreement. And here is where I need to tell you something about myself. I had not instructed Gerald to bring up prenuptial agreements. I had asked him about the financial situation and my options around the rehearsal dinner, and Gerald, being Gerald, thorough, bow-tied, precise, had apparently mentioned in passing to someone. I still am not entirely sure how this chain worked, that in cases involving significant pre-wedding financial contributions from a parent, it was worth both parties understanding the full picture of assets. I did not plan that, but I did not correct it either. I looked at my son across the kitchen table and I said, "Nathaniel, I have 2 rental properties, a retirement account, and 23 years of financial decisions made to protect this family's future. If you are going to marry someone, you should both be having honest conversations about money, about what each of you is bringing in and what you expect. That is not about me. That is about you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's not who I thought she was." I didn't say anything. I let that sentence sit. He said, "Not Tara. Not completely, but her mother. This whole thing." I kept telling myself it was just style differences, just different families having different ways of doing things. He paused. "But it wasn't that, was it?" I said, "No, baby, it wasn't." He put his head down on his arms on my kitchen table like he was 12 years old again, like he used to do after a hard day at school, and I got up and put my hand on the back of his head the way I always had, and we stayed like that for a while. The wedding did not happen on the date they had planned. I want to say that clearly. I did not stop the wedding. My son made his own choices. He is a grown man who was raised to think for himself, and when something was finally put plainly in front of him, he was capable of seeing it. What he saw, over those weeks, was that the woman he was going to marry had been participating. Not just passively allowing, but actively participating in something that was designed to diminish his mother's place in his life. The prenup conversation, which I still only half understand how it got started, surfaced some additional things about the way Tara and her mother had been managing certain financial expectations for after the wedding. Things Nathaniel hadn't known about. Things that, once he knew them, changed how he understood the situation. He called off the engagement in November, a week before Thanksgiving. It was not a dramatic moment for me. I did not feel triumphant. I cooked dinner that week, and I set a place at the table for him, and I let him talk, and I listened, and I fed him baked chicken and macaroni, and I did not once say "I told you so," because that is not something you say to someone sitting at your table with a broken heart, even if you did, in fact. Tell them so. I am going to tell you the thing nobody prepares you for, which is that when you raise a child, you pour so much of yourself into them that you start to believe the pouring is invisible, that they won't see it, that they'll just take it for granted the way they'd take for granted the roof over their heads and the food on the table and the fact that you showed up at every single basketball game even when you were running on 4 hours of sleep. But sometimes they do see it. Sometimes it takes losing something for them to look back and understand what has always been there. My son called me on a Sunday morning in December, about a month after everything had settled. I was in my kitchen again, same October light, except now it was winter light, thinner, coming in at a steeper angle. I was making tea. He said, "Mom." I said, "Baby." He said, "I don't think I've said this enough. I don't think I ever said it right, but everything you did, just everything, I see it. I've always seen it. I just forgot for a little while." I stood at my kitchen counter holding my mug of tea, and I looked out at my backyard, at the driveway where I taught him to ride a bike, at the flower beds I put in the year his father passed because I needed something to grow, and I let the words land. I said, "I know you do, baby." And that was enough. That has always been enough. The blue notebook is still in my desk drawer. I keep meaning to throw it away, but I haven't yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll keep it as a reminder that documentation matters, in nursing and in life, and that a woman who pays attention and writes things down and waits for the right moment is not being passive. She is just gathering what she needs.